Welcome to A Cult of Personality. I'm Greg Kaminsky. Now, in episode number 226, we're joined by Jesse Cooper Levy, also known as Kid Cooper Levy, to discuss the book he wrote about the major arcana of the tarot and the Hebrew letters, entitled Black Fire. This was written while Jesse participated in our Meditations on the Tarot study circle at chamberofreflection.com. Jesse is an author of fiction and nonfiction, a musician, a singer, and a songwriter. You can find him on social media at Singer Wrongwriter. Black Fire is currently unpublished, but is scheduled to be released later this year. I've been friends with Jesse for a few years, and it was a joy to me that he wrote this book as part of our study circle. I'm also joined in this episode by the one and only Frater O as my co-host. You may recall Frater O from his numerous appearances on the Whence Came You podcast a few years ago, where he discussed a variety of esoteric subjects. Frater O has been a close friend for many years, so I'm thrilled to have him join us here. And I have no doubt that you'll greatly appreciate his presence as I do. A Cult of Personality podcast is made possible by you, the listeners, and by the subscribers to chamberofreflection.com, our membership website, who aids us in the cause of informed, authentic, and accessible interviews about Western esotericism. The intro music is Awakening by Paul Avgerinos, and the outro music is Highway 61 Revisited by Kid Cooper Levy. Thank you guys for joining me. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Excited to be here. Looking forward to getting into this with Kid.
For sure. So, Kid, I guess the place I'd like to begin is if you could just give us a little background sketch on yourself, because you're a talented individual in a variety of areas that people tuning into this may not be aware of. So maybe you can just give us a background sketch on yourself.
Yeah, sure. And I think some of this might tie in a little well. Yeah, so my legal name is Jesse Cooper Levy, and that's what you can reach me on in Gmail is JESSECOOPERLEVY. So I was always writing. I was always a writer. I went to college for playwriting and screenwriting, and one of my biggest influences in writing is actually not a fiction writer, is a fiction critic named Northrop Frye, who my brother had gotten me into, and Frye had thought that William Blake was accurate in his opinion that all of literature could be traced back to the Bible. So that's Western literature, obviously, but Frye's work was a big impact on me. And I was studying plays and film, and I was really into avant-garde cinema and really into cinema, but I realized I was spending a lot of time thinking about, like something Joe Schmo made in Canada or something, or like a Rainer Werner Fassbinder movie, which I love. But this idea of studying things that were sacred became interesting to me after like writing 14 pages on some avant-garde film. I was like, okay, what is this idea of studying sacred texts? And that became more interesting to me as I was traveling with the band. I was playing in a band called the Terror Pigeon Dance Revolt, a bunch of guys I went to college with, and we drove it out from New York to Texas. Was I think the last place on our trip, and I got to this random New Age bookstore in Texas, and I met this woman who seemed to be a pretty sincere spiritual practitioner at this bookstore. And long story short, I left the bookstore with a copy of Meditations on the Tarot. And so I started heading back to New York with this book, which talked a fair bit about sacred texts and was of the opinion that the tarot was a sacred text. It's very interesting very interesting, very different approach to me, but something I had some knowledge of, at least appreciation for being into art criticism, but not really having a language of spiritual practice, so to speak. But this idea of an in-depth study of something was something that I had already done, and I liked the idea of doing it to something that felt more like it warranted it. Nothing against the films of Rainer Werner Fassbinder.
So that's a very interesting connection you have there.
Yeah, so I would continue to write, and I continue to write fiction, um, but that was one point where I started to imbibe different sources. I mean, I think there was some interest in esoterica and such before that, but not a lot of source material to go off of in terms of different spiritual traditions.
So you've been interested in this idea of tarot for a long time.
Yeah, a fair bit. I mean, I'm in Greg's discussion group through Chamber of Reflections, the member site of this website, which has been really great. And I noticed that a number of us had said things at our first meeting to the effect of, well, we picked this book up 10 years ago, we read it, and then we just put it on the shelf, like the top shelf, with some amount of reverence, but we did not know what to do with it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think tarot has kind of been burned at both ends for me, in terms of like me doing way too many readings about my love life, and then also seeing it as this really sacred thing. And I don't know if it's, you know, written by divinities or if it's the Book of Thoth. You know, I just know I get something from it. I seem to get something from it. And so with that said, I, you know, was learning some books of correspondences on the tarot and things like that. But Tomberg was a big, sorry to out him, the author of Meditations on the Tarot, was a big influence for me, and still is, and is very much in, you know, the work I'm doing in this book, Black Fire, which is a book on the Hebrew letters and the tarot.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, Meditations on the Tarot has definitely been, like you said, on the top shelf. Didn't know how to apply it or how to make use of its meaning that it was trying to convey. And I think on some level now I understand, because when you actually understand what it's saying, it means you have to change your entire life. And I wasn't ready to do that at that point.
Yeah, you know, my friend said the same thing. I got him a copy. I mailed it to New York. My buddy Ben Shields, and you know, he said, like, he picked it up and he was like, all right, you're gonna have, the first chapter is gonna be concentration without effort. Like, how do you go past that? You know, and it's tall orders in that book.
For sure. Yeah.
So with the tarot in your daily life, do you find yourself picking up decks and helping you? You mentioned a reference of reading, you know, a lot of books in love life and other aspects as well. So how do you find the tarot playing a massive end part on your journey?
Yeah. So the tarot, kind of like what we're saying with the Tomberg's work, is like, yes, I read tarot. I do tarot readings. I do them in person. I do them on Zoom. I do them quite frequently. Um, I find that, like, the interpretation of the meaning of the symbolism bleeds into tarot readings. A book like Tomberg's is kind of interesting because it's like a really long reading that we're all getting together. And that's been cool to see in the study group, that everybody's like, they're really feeling it because we're sort of deeply contemplating these symbols. But yeah, I mean, I certainly get something out of the tarot and I keep going back to it. It's interesting. I opened my book with a quote that I had to trace down because a rabbi had said it to me. Um, but it was a quote by Rabbi Ben Bagbag, I think is the author of it, and it's one of the only quotes we have. I think it's the only quote we have of his. But the part of it that's of relevance is it in relation to the Torah, because the Torah was written on scrolls. So he says, "Turn it and turn it because it's all in it." So that's been my I love that contemplation, but it's been my approach to the tarot, which is basically an unbounded book. So you're physically turning it all the time. And it's also my approach to tarot reading, which is when you're looking at a bunch of cards, you get the vague Crowley names for them, but it's only after you sort of are putting all these different pieces together. And for me, it's asking a lot of questions of the person I'm discussing with. The way I think about it is that the tarot is both diagnostic and prescriptive. So I work for herbalists, and one thing I learned from them is this idea of getting confirmation of something, because I can't trust myself that I can do a reading and tell you when to buy Bitcoin. Like, I just don't want that kind of authority over somebody else's life. So I like to look at the cards and then ask questions and see if I'm getting any confirmation of what I seem to be seeing. And it's also a way that I'm relating to all the symbols, because the reason tarot works is because we think we know everything, and we think we know enough, and this other force can show up and put things into perspective. So one thing I get a lot of is really asking questions of myself or the other person to try to see to really turn it over.
Is there a certain deck that you gravitate towards that you really enjoy? You referenced a lot of amazing authors earlier, and each one pulls from a different thread, and sometimes certain decks speak to certain people. What do you find is the most significant for you?
Yeah, so Meditations is on the Marseille Tarot, the old French tarot deck. And that was really deep for me. But the other book that really sold me on it is Alejandro Jodorowsky's Way of Tarot. And I can't remember the surrealist he spoke to one day. But he'd said to him, like, the Marseille will never reveal its secrets. And that's been my experience. In my experience, and other people may have very different interpretations of the tarot, but my experience has been that other decks will impose symbolism on the tarot. Whereas the Marseille is just a gift that keeps on giving. That said, I have a Visconti deck. I have a variation on the Arthur Wade Coleman Smith deck. I have the Superfina, which is a remake of the Marseille from Italy.
Greg, what about you? What deck works for you that you found in your journey?
I really love the Thoth deck, the Crowley Frida Harris deck, for doing readings and contemplation, but I also love the Paul Foster Case BOTA Major Arcana Tarot for like really trying to delve into like the original symbolism and meanings of some of the images, and in terms of like tracing them back, the ideas and the symbol, like through art in time and mythology, because I find that to be really interesting too. So those are probably the two for me that are the most important.
Wow. Yeah. For me, it's, the Paul Foster Case is great when you get into, with my Masonic background, the BOTA was significant. And then of course, Manly P. Hall did a magnificent deck as well that the good. PRS just redid, which you can find on their website. And then I really loved, from a Masonic background, the whole idea of the actual playing cards was the original tarot that I think H.P. Bromwell in one of his books gets into, of like, there's a reason why the playing deck cards was like the original Oracle cards. Now, I'm not here to debate what is what, but those are the ones that speak to me and the significance. So it's, Kid, you brought up a really good point on dogma, on how it imprints on, certain decks, and the idea of dogma, and the importance of, through the lens of egos of previous adepts or previous wonderful people that have passed on their wisdom. What things have you found from your own journey through your lens that you maybe helped interpret from other dogma, or that you have had profound impacts or profound understandings that, even if it's from other
Yeah.
people's tarot readings?
So I wonder if this will answer the question. So, I had a fear earlier when I was doing this that if I read something, it would like clash with what I was working on, especially because there's so many very codified systems. And I was reluctant to take them on. What I found is that the process of learning is more integrative than that, and that you can take what you like and leave the rest. That said, I did walk into my therapist's office one day and say, I saw something I can't unsee. And what I couldn't unsee was a small online publication called Exploring the Alphabetic Tarot by Mark Philippus, I think, which became a big basis for my book, because I was really torn between two systems, and they're the two systems of correspondences of the Hebrew letters to the major arcana of the tarot. Now there are variations within those systems, but they're basically, which is Aleph? Is it the fool, or is it the magician? Very basic. There's side arguments there, and as I quote in my book, there's an expression of my people called, it goes, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. So these arguments can keep bifurcating, but I do think about something Sam Harris once said very often, and I'm not a huge Sam Harris fan, but he'd said they don't have to be interoperable. Like, all these systems don't have to be interoperable, and so you can give me a perfectly good tarot reading from a system that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. So it's very strange that way.
Yeah, that is interesting. Kid, do you want to talk more about those two systems of correspondence with the Hebrew letters and the tarot major arcana? Because I felt like that was a point it's a point of contention for some people, but it's just an interesting way of making, like, assigning values and meanings, but that there's not agreement about it is also super interesting.
Yeah, and I think part of that disagreement is because of the sort of reductionistic way Jewish thought has filtered into Western esoterica. My book is a synthesis of 4 books on by different rabbis on the meanings of the Hebrew letters, essentially. Within that, there's a lot of commentary on the symbolism of the tarot. And I keep pausing between saying those words because I never know when I'm going to say Torah or tarot. But it's because, the interpretation is often, Aleph is an ox or Beit is a house. It's like, yes, and is sort of the approaches within Jewish thought. And so the texts I've read, like, there's some agreement in them, but some of them are on totally different pages on certain things. It goes back to the expression I said, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Only my buddy says, I thought it was 12 opinions. It's like, we don't even agree how much we agree or disagree. But I've found that, if I write something, it might be easier for someone if you're using the correspondences that came later in the history of tarot. It might be easier to just look at the source material of these rabbinical scholars than to look at my book. But you might be able to superimpose what I've written to the next letter. But this system sort of clinked into place as I was writing more and as I kind of got my sea legs in working through this. So the basic 2 systems, and we could talk about this, is the basic 2 systems correspond to 22 letters of the major arcana of the tarot with the 22 Hebrew letters. Now, the final, in my opinion, or the first in other opinions, of the major arcana is the Fool. So it's not typically numbered, although I believe earlier tarot cards weren't numbered at all, which we can talk about or discuss, with the exception of the minor arcana. But so I kind of place it at both the beginning and the end, because I do believe it's cyclical. But that's my opinion.
But I mean it is in many decks numbered as 0, which implies what you're saying also.
Yeah. So and I place it as the Tav, the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And I place it there because of correspondences I see within within that arcana itself. His stance and the objects he holds so much resembling the Tao cross that is often associated with that. And then I put Aleph at the ordinal number of 1, with the magician. Now that was an older system of tarot, unless you believe the claim of the Golden Dawn, which is that they have the older system. They're just currently making it public. That system places the Fool at Aleph. There are breakdowns further, but that's the essential difference, I would say.
Yeah, that's essential. And I know the Marseille deck, it's really graphical, because when you look at the imagery from these older decks, like the figures in them do sort of take the shape of the Hebrew letter, or spaces in the card like illustrate the letter with negative space, or they have ways of all doing it, so they're all kind of like matching up in a graphic image way.
Yeah.
Where
So
I feel like in the more recent decks where you have Aleph as the Fool, like they're doing something in a more it's not as straightforward, right? It's like they're taking the meaning of the Hebrew letter and then looking at the meaning of the tarot card, and then kind of like trying to make those into the thing.
yeah, I think I've seen that, and I also have seen it be fairly reductionary in terms of, you know, that I can read 15 pages on one letter in the works of a rabbi, is because these were very nuanced ideas within Judaism, and ideas stacked upon ideas. And so I think there's more to be gained from them than just the sort of cut out, put back on a flashcard meaning of the letter, which became very interesting to me. Tomberg in Meditation on the Tarot says either one sees correspondences or one does not. So it just happened that this made sense to me, and it really resonated with me. And I'm not sure that, I can arm wrestle anybody into my opinion. But things started to really click into place after I had looked at exploring the alphabetic tarot, and then continued to look into these Hebrew sources. And what I did was, as we're in this study group on meditation of the tarot, I would just compile my notes, and I would read along a chapter as we would read along a chapter. So I'd be reading Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg's Hebrew Letters, Channels of Creative Consciousness, and explore Wisdom of the Hebrew Letters by Rabbi Michael Monk. These are fairly more recent books, but they will compile a lot of older thought. And so I'd be reading those chapters along with and contemplating the letters.
Let's double click on that, like contemplating letters. We've covered a lot of this. And Greg, you feel free to edit this part out too, because I don't want to overstep. If you have a question you want to
discuss
for this, okay. Like which one specifically really has enticed you, that you have found yourself, maybe that you started with, that you found yourself at a different question or different letter, but which one do you find yourself really getting into the most personally?
Well, yeah, so I had learned from a Kabbalist who I'm no longer in touch with, and many of my friends are no longer in touch with. He's doing his own thing right now. And so I went back and looked at my notes on the magician, and I had seen that my notes were originally in his system, which would have put the magician at the bait, or the base, however you pronounce it. And I looked back and I noticed that my writing wasn't very good, first of all. And I looked at that, and I looked and I was seeing things that I wasn't seeing. I was seeing things in my writing that I wasn't seeing in the card. And what I was seeing in the card happened to be what my teacher teaches. So I don't know what a coincidence that is. But I started to see something in the olive. Now, there's a story my teacher tells. It's from the book Souls on Fire by Greg, help me out here. Elie Wiesel?
Yes.
Yes. So the story is, and Greg, you can help me with this story if I'm getting it wrong here. The story is Rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, so the master of the good name. The Baal Shem Tov and his student are, I believe, trying to get to the Holy Land in a ship, and they're shipwrecked, and they forget everything they'd known. And the master, the Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov, asked his disciple if he remembered anything, and he said, "Well, I remember the alphabet." And the Rebbe says, "Begin, start. Let's do this." Now, my teacher, I believe, says something that isn't in the book there, although maybe in different versions of this story because of the law of two Jews, three opinions, which is that as soon as his student said the Aleph, the rabbi and his student remembered everything. So this is somewhat within the meaning of the Aleph. The Aleph consists of three different letters as constituent elements: the Yud, the Vav, and the Yud. So it has a numerical value because of the value of those letters of 26, which is the number of the name of God, the Yod and Hey and Vav and Hey. It's interesting because in esoteric circles, they'll say this name of God. In Jewish circles, they won't even say the letters together. But the idea is that all the mysteries are contained within the Aleph. And so what I see when I look at the magician now is, as Tomberg says, I can't unsee it. I can't unsee what my teacher teaches, that there's a single great bindu that then is divided into two elements, and that those elements become the male and female of a human being, the masculine and feminine, the receptive and the active. And now I look at the magician and I see him holding a ball in one hand, and I see him holding this extension of the ball into 2 points. And I see all this geometry of, he has the one and then it's subdivided into the two, and then it's on a three-legged base. And you see kind of dimensionality all being created by this. And then on that three-legged base is the dice, which have 6 directions. And you see, like, I just see things I can't unsee anymore.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I find it to be, yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, I don't know if it's because we have the same teacher, probably, but I see what you mean when you start to say, like, these things that you see in the cards and the meanings that you can't, like, ignore anymore, because it's like it's saying the same thing that you already know to be true, in a way.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, let's say I'm doing a meditation practice, and I remember to view, all the men around me as Manjushri, and all the women around me as Tara, and like somebody walks in and I don't know if they're a man or a woman. Like, I'm doing the practice. That's what matters. I don't remember to do this practice, but it's an example. The point is that, like, what I've thought about a lot in this writing is that, like, contemplating the teachings of the rabbis is what matters, and whether or not I get there. I had a Jewish friend. We were talking about creation one time. He's like, his wife at one point said, "Look, you're never going to know what happened. I don't know who made the tarot. Crowley says the origins of tarot are perfectly obscure, and I'm agreeing with you with the connection of to the playing cards, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. So I don't know what I'm seeing is accurate. But I think that contemplation of the Torah or of the great rabbis or of my teachers' work is of maybe more significance than me thinking I see something in like the magician's hand.
That's an interesting thought.
Well, it's my justification in case I'm getting it wrong.
Is there a right or wrong, though? I mean, this is really important of self-interpretation and the idea of, we could sit here and debate, and I think it was Aristotle or Socrates in Stoic philosophy that said it best, that life is a mystery to live, not to be solved. And it's great to be able to have letters or tarot decks to be gentle reminders to help us remember the path that we're on. And you brought up a wonderful, great point in the discussion earlier on how when you first read The Magician till now, and the aspect of how much your consciousness changed to be able to absorb so much more, and the importance of tarot and importance of these wonderful reminders or systems to really help us with introspection for change and contemplation.
Frater O, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's probably like, because this is a sacred piece of art, it's not trying to communicate its meaning linguistically. If it was trying to, it would have. So I think you're making a really relevant point there.
Well, thank you. And Greg too, I would love for your opinion too. I don't want to take away too much from Kid, but I mean, like what has been the most influential card or letter for you?
I don't know that I'd actually be able to answer you on this one, because I think there was a time when I had certain ones that were more important or influential, but like the more I looked at it and studied it and thought about it and actually done readings, it seems more like an entire, like he said, it's like a whole book, but just unbound. So it's hard to tease out which is the most that I don't know. I mean,
that's a great answer.
I feel like, I guess in different moments there would be different cards.
Well, I think that's one of the great things about it, is that it becomes, we could argue whether or not randomized, but it doesn't, the tarot doesn't care which is your favorite card, which is kind of why it works, because you don't get what you're looking for.
Well said. Extremely well said. They all speak to all of us, right? And the importance of that life is only a mirror, and the importance of, it's wonderful to have tools to reflect back of where you're currently at, and then change and constant changes in the universe. And I love that you referenced the Magician. That's a very important card. But then you also referenced, the Fool, and the aspect of the deeper aspect of the Fool. And at any point in time, we're all playing a different character or a different point in different stages in our lives and through growth. But, the idea of different letters too. And when you get into the specifics of the correlations between the two, it's magnificent. So I'd love to double click on that a little bit more, or drill into that on the aspects of, the letters and the correlation between the tarot. And I know, Greg, you asked a wonderful question earlier, on, my God, I'm drawing a blank on the question you asked, but it was great that Kit was getting into on the deeper aspects of the correlation between the two.
But yeah, I think that's a good question to ask about the Hebrew letters, the images, the meanings of the cards. I feel like I don't know. I mean, if I'm honest, I haven't read the entire manuscript at this point. So, but from the chapters I have read, I see the way that you visually like analyze the image on the tarot, and then you're kind of like talking about the meanings of the Hebrew letter and how these all like interrelate. And I felt like certainly with the magician and the priestess, like it was pretty profound. I felt like the level or the depth of the analysis and like symbolism and the way you tease this out. So I feel like, yeah, we should delve deeper into the process of like discovering these insights.
Yeah, so a lot of that work has been done for me in terms of the rabbinic. What has not been done is this relation to the tarot. So I'm coming from a place where I didn't find the arguments within Kabbalah with a Q compelling. So Kabbalah with a Q would be Western esoteric Kabbalah, yeah? Which may work perfectly well for people. But as someone who has an interest in Kabbalah with a K, Jewish Kabbalah, some of these things weren't particularly compelling. For instance, there's a very codified system of which of the major arcana are mapped onto which elements of the tree of life. This doesn't seem to be how it's viewed within Judaica. There are various systems. I would love to use the system that's used by the Ari or the Arizal Rabbi, Isaac Luria. But I believe that I'm not convinced whether or not he has one system. I'll have to read all his works, which will take me a minute. But it goes back to the two Jews, three opinions. The idea that there was one way to map every letter onto the paths of the tree of life is not exactly how Jewish thought works. The idea that each letter has one meaning is not exactly how Jewish thought works. And so Jewish thought is just commentary on commentary on commentary on the Torah. And these are letters, and the letters break down into other letters, and the letters have number values, but the letters that those letters consist of as constituent elements have other number values. And then those letters can be run through an Atbash cipher so that the opposite letter can be used to contemplate. So it's just endless, and it's just endless study. In fact, I talk about this a little bit in my chapter on the Samak, which it corresponds in my system to the devil. And but a Samak is it can mean many things. It can mean I've heard rabbis say that it can mean a band, it can mean reincarnation, it can stand for the shaitan is what it seems to be in the tarot. It seems to stand for the Satan. And it's amazing how many of these corollaries that I've found actually work in English as I gone through this book, weirdly enough. But one of the meanings is of the Samak is to create a contemplation, and that will bind you to an element of the thing. So you'll look at two elements and find how they relate to another element of Torah, and you're doing what Rabbi Bagbag is talking about. You're turning it and turning it because it's all in it. And so as I've gone through, I've kind of made my own. That's kind of what I've done with the tarot, was made my own, just as other rabbis have done these by, finding the numeric value of one passage versus another word, which is just like, you wouldn't even know what to tell an AI to look for. But many of these rabbis have done it. It's really impressive. I don't know if I answered the question.
So, Kid, your book is called Black Fire. Maybe you could just spend a minute telling us about what that is.
So, I wish I understood this stuff better. So there's also an idea in the pay. I'm not done geeking out, apparently. In the pay is mouth. is one of the meanings of it. And so I corresponded to the star because the Book of Toth tells us that the star is not a Zadik. The Book of the Law, I should say. So Hey is supposed to be mouth, and it's said that if people around you know more Torah, you should shut up. And if people around you know less Torah, you should talk. So I'm in a weird place where I know like less than like average yeshiva boy about these things, but I know some more about it than your garden variety esotericist who might not know Kabbalah with K. And all I can say is this is what I know from my tradition, or some tradition that I'm vaguely associated with or have studied at least. What was the question?
The Black Fire. What's
thanks.
Fire?
Yeah, so Black Fire is so the primordial Torah was written with black fire on white fire, which is just so cool. Except that it's the opposite of cool. So that's sort of the joke in this book is that the Hebrew letters, if you look at them, they look like these frozen flames that are sort of blowing to the right in the direction that they're being read. And so the idea of the primordial Torah is a very interesting one because it means that Torah isn't supposed to be this static thing. It's supposed to be like our God is a consuming fire, So the idea of fixing the understandings of all these letters is, I've been thinking about it like throwing a bonfire in the fridge so you can like microwave it the next morning. Like it's going to lose some of the potency of what it really is. But as I try to explore it, what I'm trying to think about is that living flame that is behind the letters of the tarot, the arcana of the tarot and the letters of the Torah.
Do you feel like, I mean, you talk about this sort of, you kind of sort of alluded to it in referencing this idea of the way that Christians and then Hermeticists after that kind of adopted Kabbalah for their own purposes. But when I look at your book, it looks like what you're doing is basically taking the tarot from them and then kind of like adapting it back to the Jewish Kabbalah, which isn't difficult because like it's all connected and I see like the meanings all make sense. So otherwise, we wouldn't even be talking with you about it. But I find it just fascinating the way these things kind of go back and forth. They get pushed and pulled in different directions. And I know ultimately like labels are not the thing, but the way we divide this up, the way we think of it, the way you can't divorce the tradition from it. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think it's part of this uninteroperability that things can still work under. So I try not to make the claim that the tarot is the Hebrew letters, because what do I know? But there's definitely seems to be something popping off in here. It's like my friend, people like to ask him because he's really good with the Chinese zodiac. People want to ask him, is an ox a Taurus? And it's like, our teacher's really good at dodging these kinds of questions because what you're trying to do is not think about either.
Right. Yeah. You just want someone to give you an answer so you don't have to think about it. You don't have to deal with it, be responsible for it. And that makes sense. So this book came out of your sort of like your notes for our tarot discussions. And I feel like they've definitely proven fruitful in that respect. But beyond that, like, what do you see? Like, who do you see as the audience for this book? Because I feel like it's probably bigger than like it is encompasses more than one group.
Well, yeah, and I thought of whitewashing it for those purposes, but I think that the thing to do would be to just be my authentic self. I'm trying not to use holy names that would offend people in the text, because I can respect that. That's not terribly out of my way. But when I saw an element of the Vajrayana system that I thought was useful, I went, fine, I guess I got to put this in. But I would love if Hasidic Jews would read my book. I'm not convinced they'll pick it up, but if they do, I'm thrilled. And if I can talk to some of those rabbis about it, I would love that. And like I think the man who's doing the book of the Tarot of Torah, or the writing on Torah of Tarot, or whatever, it's very interesting work. But yeah, I imagine this is going to be for some esotericists who might not be sold on the on the existing systems, or just want some more data from another system, because you don't have to cross over to my system. But part of the reason I created it was because I was underwhelmed by what I'd originally saw there, because I wanted, I wasn't sold on these paths, because Jewish thought isn't a ton about the paths and the letters. It's more about the letters. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen that much on the paths. I could be looking in the wrong places, or I couldn't be, maybe I wasn't initiated in the right sect. But yeah, so I hope it's for esotericists who have an open mind, or can get something from it, even if they're not converted to my system. Hopefully they can get something. I go a fair bit into the meaning of the letters. You'd probably get more if you decided to read the books of 4 different rabbis, if you want to correspond it to the Golden Dawn system. Yeah.
So, Frater O, to circle back to connections with Masonry, I think the first time I remember encountering this idea of the Marseille Tarot and the Hebrew letters was in one of Tim Hogan's books, where he was kind of like describing the Kabbalah in terms of like the way Masons were also like the ones that were adapting this system for their higher degrees and whatnot. So I think it's interesting how this subject is, well, it all goes back to really the Bible and the central ideas of man and divinity.
Hogan is a great read, and for those who are listening, he has a wonderful show on Gaia now with Scott Walter hunting ancient Templar artifacts. But back to his original work, like a decade ago that he did, maybe 12 or 14 years ago, it's magnificent. The correlations between the two, and we all need humble and gentle reminders too along the path of, hey, where am I? And then what's speaking to me. And sometimes we get kind of lost in the play of life, and it's easy to do. And can it be a tarot? Can it be a letter? Can it be a sound? Can it be a vibration? And the importance of each one of those really like reflecting back of this mirror of life to us. And Kid, it sounds like you do a wonderful, magnificent job for a lot of people to be able to see the correspondence between the two. And it's, I'm really looking forward to, getting into this, and when this book comes out and reading it. And I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to the show will really take a lot from it as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, my good friend Seth had said that it was reading more like a series of, I don't know if he was saying poetry or contemplations, but I sort of, that's what I was sort of wanting to go for. because that's what I was getting at a lot of the work of the great Hasidic rabbis or the Arizal or people that were speaking about speaking about these things in ways that really brought out some beauty in them. So my book is not about tarot readings. It's not about how to give tarot readings. If it's fruitful to people who read tarot, I'd be really thrilled about that. But it's more me trying to share something that I found really deep and beautiful.
Yeah, when Frater O, when you were talking about what it is that brings us back, like it can be an image or a sound, and I love the way this kind of connects with your book and the way you included some of the Vajrayana stuff in there, because like that a whole notion of like what brings us back to the source, like, because it very much reminds me of like that Dokensei quote, right? Like, I will come back as like, a gentle breeze through the trees, but it doesn't really matter because it's like you said too, like maybe it's more important that we study the words of the sages than think we can figure it all out on our own.
Well, it's interesting. I think that not that I've unpacked the meaning of letters, but I think the idea of letters as sacred symbols invites us to the consideration that phenomena is divine. It invites us to the consideration that all words are then divine. And so, what you do with that or how you interpret that, I'm sure I'm not expressing very eloquently. But it does seem to invite us into a worldview that isn't held back by phenomena, but is invited towards contemplation through it.
It's beautiful.
That's well said.
Well, I see that in the tarot now, as I happen to be, we're looking at the world and the last few cards while reading the Gospel of Srimana Maharshi. It's really difficult not to, Ramakrishna, I'm sorry. It's really difficult not to, but it's very strange in the world. Because it comes after the judgment or the last judgment, which is to me, because I know a little bit of my Course in Miracles, is when you have your last judgment and when you're done judging everyone and everything around you, and then you can see the world in a new light. In some traditions, you stop the world. In Carlos Castaneta's tradition, you stop the world. But in Judaism, it's said a bit differently. It's said as a distinction between the world and the world to come. So the world to come is what seems to happen after the last judgment. And that's when we can ascertain phenomena as divine.
Sounds good. Trying to remember if there were any other points we wanted to hit on here.
Well, I'm curious if there's any fierce opposition to any of the ideas I'm putting forward.
I mean, I don't have any real opposition at all to it. I feel like, I don't know exactly what state of completion your book is in, because I feel like what I'm reading is like a draft that's close, but not quite done. I could be wrong, but I felt like it was really refreshing. It was fun to read. It was interesting. And I didn't feel like I got bogged down in like the normal, like type of writing that I encounter in esoteric books. Like there's humor, there's brevity, there's interesting ways of thinking about things and a progression that I wouldn't have thought of myself often.
I appreciate you saying there's humor because I was about to go and take all of that out.
Yeah, I wouldn't remove it because I felt like I feel like books like this have a tendency towards heaviness and like gravity and weightiness, and and the humor kind of antidotes it. Like you do it in a kind of a fun way. Like when I write, I tend to do it in a more like self-deprecating way, or like just being so brutally honest that like
Mm.
if it is heavy, it's also like this is kind of ridiculous as well. But
I mean, sometimes it's just so obvious to me. Like I was writing about the letter Kof and the Hebrew letters, and the I was writing about like the meaning of the nation of Israel, and I was like nervous about writing about that in this current day and age. And then I'm like looking at the card, I'm like, there's like two Aryan boys running around this card. Like it's obviously not about the nation of Israel in any literal sense.
it's pretty funny.
I thought so. But I wasn't sure if any of that was coming across. And I think for me, it was also because I was saying some things that were just like the work I'm doing is just so bizarre that if I didn't see the humor in the situation, I would just think that it was idiotic.
I guess one question I have to ask, and we can cut this out if it's not really necessary, but how do you feel like that the work of the Torah Tarot, the Stavapel guy, where he's basically like showing that the Noblette Tarot, which I think is closely related to the Marseille, like is actually conveying like Hebrew, like Jewish religion, and not always like what we see in it, like these
Yeah.
esoteric ideas and like ways of directly connecting with divinity that are sort of unbounded by religious ritual, tradition, dogma, etc.
Yeah. So I there's a few ways to answer that. Um, I do not practice in the Jewish system. I practice in another system. So the mitzvot don't bog me down, but I have another system, and so I lucked out. I lucked out in two regards, but in the because I have a system and I can also study. Um, so I'm not following the mitzvot, but I'm also not just completely doing whatever I want. Although that happens. Um, and so when I use a term Torah, I'm using it in the way that Jews seem to mean it, which is the expressiveness of the divine. Um, Now that's not how every Jew always uses it. So I'm less interested in that, and I also think that I don't know the origins of the tarot. I make up that there is this kind of like on the Silk Road in Samarkand, like this consortium of faiths that made this symbol, or that it's the divinely inspired Book of Thoth from the Sanctuary of the Everlasting Zones. I can't prove that, and I'd love to think that. And if either of you have thoughts on where the heck this book comes from, that'd be very interesting to me. But I think that there's like far too many Christian sources in this book for it to purely be the Jewish faith.
Yeah, I cannot. The more I learn, the less I know, and then the more and more it seems to be like a massive game of telephone of morals and dogma. Not to reference Albert Pike's book, Morals and Dogma, but those two terms in general, that the meanings of each one of them, I mean, it's this dissected over and over and over. So to the lineage point, there's lots of debate online. So I will not be able to dive into this. However, I will defer to Greg, who might be able to impart some wisdom on this.
No, I mean, I feel like on many levels I do agree that clearly someone put the tarot together as a organized system. And I believe there's enough evidence that you could trace some of the imagery back through time and classical sources like art, sculpture, whatnot. But on some level, I feel like having used it and studied it, like there is some like pattern of wholeness that is inherent within the tarot deck. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to function the way that it does and interface with our psyche and our consciousness in such a way to allow us to know things that rationally we shouldn't really be able to know or figure out. So there's something to it in that regard. But I feel like you're right. And the more I learn, the more knowledge is accumulated, the greater the longing to unknow it all in order to know knowingness, to know reality. And I'm pretty sure it's not even me that's longing for that. It's the reality itself that's longing for it somehow through me, despite my resistance to it. And tarot, I guess, is just another way that it's like calling me, like, hey, like, not like get back on the path. Like, you're not, you need to like focus, like rededicate, like I don't know.
Sacred art and tarot are wonderful reminders of those. Hey, we're on a path, and I think Rumi said it best on My Journey that we're once this knight who goes on a quest. When you first go on this quest, and then you've been on this quest for so long, you forget why you're on this quest. But to build on that, kid, you talked about the importance of sacred art and the importance of art to be able to pass meaning. Let's drill into that a little bit more. Like the importance of art in general and knowledge for self-uncovery and meaning. And throughout your journey, you've had multiple innovations or just undiscoveries of this. Do you care to dive a little bit deeper on art?
I mean, I'm not sure what I can say. My teacher gives me enough rope to hang myself as an artist. I don't, he hasn't given me many restrictions. So I have the fears and insecurities I'd mentioned earlier with the tarot, where I was saying, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong. And Frater O, you're saying maybe that's not the right lens to use here. I have a certain trepidation about my art having any greater purpose, although I will say I do have an aspiration that it is a benefit to people. But I'm not terribly dogmatic about it, at least in my own mind. I'll watch Seinfeld. I'm not particular. But yeah, I also think I don't know if it's like sacred art is a strange concept. So like what does that mean, and what makes something sacred? And for me, I was resistant for a long time for that meaning. You had to put a bunch of angels in your art or it didn't have any meaning. But now my work has a lot of angels in it. I just found like whatever ways to stab into contemplation. For me, it's often I like to work in a system, and that system like of writing or research, and then I can learn a lot about that system as I'm writing. So I wrote a screenplay with a Persian friend, and I got to learn about his faith a lot and research that. I'm writing this and I got to research that. So that is something that has kept me. I think that an artist who is maybe more integrated doesn't need direct signposts of external exoteric symbols for their art to be about faith. It might just be a poem about, I'm thinking of the Sweet Brown Harlem Girls song my teacher, which was based on the poem by Langston Hughes, I think, when I write about a sweet brown Harlem girl, it's normally a sweet brown Harlem girl. But I try to also, think about these things and give them some context. I'm not sure I'm answering your question once again.
There's no right or wrong answer. It's it's the importance of what art means to you. And
I mean, I try to find what symbols will work in the piece and when they'll fall apart. And when those symbols will fall apart, I got to speak with Greg about his book, Celestial Intelligences, and Pico's idea that angels had bodies. I was like, angels have bodies? So that started the next horror screenplay in the Slaughterhouse for me. It was just that one idea that just kept going, and then I keep doing research. And so the metaphors fall apart somewhere. But for me, it's about getting to push them a little bit further. Teacher has instructed me to secret agent ideas into my writing. So that's what I try to do. And it's probably a chance to have some refuge while I'm, telling my story about Boy Meets Girl.
It's interesting.
Yeah, this is my first attempt at a nonfiction.
Yeah, that's what I was just like thinking about. Like, you haven't written this type of book before, but I noticed in the sort of the introduction that it seems to come pretty naturally to you.
Yeah, well, I've read a lot of this stuff. I've read a lot of spiritual texts, and I've definitely been involved in Jewish thought for a fairly long time, whatever the heck that means. But then my writing has been more and more, like my first book would be a few different ideas with different Bible quotes in it. And then my second book, I've had to read a lot of the writings of the Arizal or other authors to actually think about what the heck I was doing, because I wanted to get some of my understanding of the angels in this fiction piece up to speed. And so it's just been kind of going further and further into the direction of these contemplations until, a book like this was born, which still has characters. They're just not my characters. They're just death and the virgin and force and the homie getting out of the grave and judgment.
Sounds quite a bit of a departure from this.
Yeah, considerably. But yeah, I just kept piling notes as we've been working along, and we've been in the study group for 2 years. So all of a sudden I'm like, really? That many pages in this thing now?
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm scared of doing more work like this, but I'm also scared of not doing more work like this because of your point, Frater O, of having these reminders, and I think us academic types can get into trouble because we think we have something to say rather than something to learn. But it's also nice to have something to study.
I find when I write, is when I learn the most, because it forces me to actually articulate my thoughts about something, which I'll never forget. I had this teacher. He said, if you don't write down your thoughts, they're only half complete. And so I've learned that to actually write out my thoughts and complete them involves a lot more work than at first you'd think it would. Like, it would seem like, oh, I'm thinking about these things. I know some information. I'm just going to write it out. But then in trying to do that, I find that I have to go and actually consider all of the underlying assumptions about what I'm saying, the origins of those ideas, the history of it all, any relevant thoughts or quotes on the matter from people whose opinion counts. Like it's just endless, really. And so you end up learning so much just in trying to figure out what you're trying to say.
There's a great story of a economist hiring an illustrator, and he wanted him to illustrate a graph for something that the economist was writing about. And then through conversations with the illustrator, he learned that the graph was impossible. And by learning that, he learned he was wrong. So yeah, you really put yourself to task, and then I'll get to learn the other thing. And I'm really honored today because this is the first real public facing thing I've been doing as an author. I'm doing as an author, even though I've written fiction before. It's been kept in a drawer. I'm privileged to do that right here. But yeah, it's probably another element of getting taken to task.
Yeah, it's interesting how this activity kind of like refreshes and reframes your thoughts about things in such a way that it clarifies, I feel like.
Rabbi Ben Bag, baby. Turn it and turn it.
This is magnificent, like the wisdom you're imparting through your lens and your story. And really, it's really important for the listener. It really comes down to, is there anything else for you to be able to impart that we didn't touch on, through your journey, your origin? We've covered your influences, we've covered the profound impact of consciousness and being mirrors and doors of perception and what you speak to. Is there anything else along that journey that you would like to impart?
Not really about my journey so much, but in terms of the import, yeah, I hope people will take a look at it and will form their own opinions. And in the words of Mr. Jordan Peterson, the only thing you have to get out of the damn conversation is one thing you didn't know. I hope people can get that from my book, and then if you just have to like rip out the introductory title chapter and put it one next door because you use a different system, then, fine. But I hope you can get something from it, which is why I'm excited about the Tour of Tarot book. Because I'm like, oh, somebody's doing it, or I don't think he has a book. He has an Instagram page. Maybe he'll have a book. But yeah, I'm hoping that the Kabbalah with a Q and Kabbalah with a K and Kabbalah with a C can all coexist. I just wanted to add something to the dialogue there.
Excellent. Well, this has been really fun, interesting, and kind of like a refreshing conversation. I appreciate it. And thank you both so much for joining me here today. It's really been a pleasure, privilege, and honor. I appreciate everything you guys have been saying, and really wonderful. And I feel like this is something that people who are interested in tarot and Hebrew in a way that they're trying to find insight or transformation, this is something that is super useful. So thank you both. Like Frater O, just amazing as always to hear your voice and your inspiring words, and Kid for sharing with us about your wonderful book and your experience.
Thank the two of you so much. I've shared my email. If people are looking to get in touch with me, if people are looking for readings, I'm on some of the social media as a singer wrong writer. So yeah, you can track me down if you want to go further into some of this stuff personally.
Thank you.
Yep. Greg, as always, thank you for providing a wonderful platform for listeners and people that are seeking truth and understanding truth, as well as giving people like Kid and a platform as well to tell their story and share their book with wonderful, wonderful listeners and avid searchers of the truth. And Kid, thank you so much for imparting so much wisdom of your journey personally and diving deep and the reflection of how you became to this book and the importance of this book. And I definitely would urge anyone listening to the show this evening to please, or this morning, or whatever time in the world you're listening, to definitely pick up a copy and dive deeper into the aspects of, consciousness, symbolism, as well as the tarot and the importance of letters and Hebrew as well.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Frater O.
First the doctor, then his bride, Muriel and Mr. Hyde, crammed in a motor wagon, hair waving, hearts dragging. Sun hits the road and her diamonds explode. She says, babe, I think I could get used to this. And radio plays some old radio craze. He says, I still remember getting juiced to this. Oh, but who tied the corners of your smile to the sun going down? Who makes you nervous saying, honey, won't you turn around? Oh, come on, baby, you know just what I become when we pass the last exit off of Highway 61. You tell me Fibonacci's code is written everywhere. You see it in the seeds, you see it spinning in the air. I looked for golden means beneath the golden setting sun. Just see the golden lines of Highway 61. You say when the drugs are hard, the living is easy. You say you'll love me when the notion doesn't tease me. Say, come on, baby, we just trying to have some fun. You say, all roads lead to Rome, you never been down Highway 61. I've loved you so long I can't remember why it's wrong. I've loved you so long I can't remember why it's wrong. I've loved you so long I can't remember why it's wrong. I've loved you so long I can't remember why it's wrong. Thank you all so much.